Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here at Stony Brook University for our Suffolk County Executive Environmental Candidate Forum. My name is Julie Ty, and I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. Our mission at the League of Conservation Voters is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We equip voters with information about climate and sustainability issues, and we encourage them to hold candidates accountable to their promises. We ensure that the environment and climate change are discussed on the campaign trail at forums like these, so that candidates are aware of the issues and voters know where they stand. I would like to thank our terrific partners who helped organize tonight's forum: Citizens Campaign for the Environment, Save the Sound, Peconic Baykeeper, Group for the East End, Save the Great South Bay, the Long Island Federation of Labor. And of course, thanks to Stony Brook for hosting us tonight and for your very icy air conditioning. We appreciate that. Now, this election season is critical to the environment, and nowhere is that more true than here in Suffolk County. And we are encouraging people not only to vote, but to vote early and to vote for the environment with their top priority. So with that in mind, early voting runs from October 28th to November 5th. You can get your absentee ballot request in no later than October 23rd. And of course, Election Day, if you want to vote on Election Day itself, is on November 7th. So we're here tonight to make sure that the environment is top of mind for the next Suffolk County Executive. And so I want to take a moment to thank the candidates, Dave Calone and Ed Romaine, for participating with us tonight. After this summer, I think it's fair to say that the environment isn't just top of mind for voters, it's permeating into their daily existence. In just the last month alone, we've seen apocalyptic hazy orange skies, the hottest temperatures the Earth has ever seen, and multiple torrential rainstorms, including yesterday's storm that brought over 4 inches of rain to Suffolk County, flooding roadways, taking down trees, and wreaking havoc on travel. And how unusual is it to have both a flood warning and an air quality advisory in the same day, which is what happened in many parts of the state earlier today. Here in Suffolk County, the location is both a blessing and a curse. The same coastlines that provide some of the most beautiful beaches in the world make it especially susceptible to the impacts of climate change, including sea level rise and coastal flooding. The seclusion that's prized by so many of these wonderful towns and villages also creates practical impacts on waste removal, which has led to a garbage crisis with the last landfills closing in short order, and recycling rates are in the dumps. It also has meant a car-first culture that relies heavily on fossil fuels and has led to congested highways and back roads. And perhaps hitting closest to home for many residents is the issue of water quality in the county. And yet, as we stand here tonight, opportunities abound for addressing these most vexing environmental challenges, from improving mass transit options to becoming a leader in renewable energy development with offshore wind to providing clean drinking water. Tonight, we look forward to speaking with the candidates about these issues and more. Now, let me explain tonight's format. Each candidate will appear on stage separately and will be allowed 2 minutes to provide an opening statement. I will then ask them a series of questions, which we've gotten from our partners, and they'll have 2 minutes to respond to those questions. We'll also have a little bit of fun with a lightning round to get beyond some of the policy stuff and get candidates to be a little more loose about some of the things that they care about here on Long Island. Finally, each candidate will get 2 minutes for a closing statement to give them an opportunity to recap their key points, highlight their strengths, and emphasize their dedication to the environment and to serving the community, or at least so I assume, since they're here with us tonight. We kindly ask the candidates to adhere to the time limits and guidelines. We do have a timekeeper who will be reminding them gently. And we hope that this format provides you, the audience, valuable information and insights into the candidates' positions, helping you to make an informed decision when it comes to casting your vote. So thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our first candidate, who I hope is waiting behind door number 1 here, Dave Calone. There we go. Thank you, that made it easier. Dave has served both as a state and federal prosecutor and is currently in private practice. Dave, thank you for being here tonight. You have 2 minutes to make an opening statement, and I'm going to go sit down. So you can do that here, or you can do that over there.
Am I going to mess up the mic? Let's see how this works. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to LCV and all the other organizations, Citizens Campaign and others who helped organize us here today. I'm excited to be here. I have the right background to be Suffolk County Executive. People of Suffolk County care about safety, and I'd be the first ever prosecutor to serve as County Executive. The people of Suffolk County care about making sure we have opportunity and affordability, and I'd be the first person ever coming from the business community to serve as County Executive. And of course, people in Suffolk County care about our environment. And I am the candidate with the broadest environmental experience of any candidate who's ever run for Suffolk County Executive before. As a prosecutor, I help prosecute executives in the oil and gas industry. In the business world, I helped grow a demand response company that helped people save money and carbon on their electric bills. I helped grow a sustainable seafood company that I'm still on the board of, bringing on aquaculture. In the not-for-profit world, I'm leading the United Way's effort to build the first ever net zero commercial building on Long Island's history. When I served on the LIPA board, I pushed to make sure that we had the largest ever renewable energy RFP put out that's now resulted in a lot of wind turbine projects being proposed and in progress. And of course, as the chair of the Planning Commission for Suffolk County for 8 years, I led the effort for Suffolk County when it came to open space, water quality, renewables, and so many others. My regional leadership, unfortunately, is really needed now because we have significant issues facing our county and our region. And two of those in particular are due to the failures of my opponent and the failures of the Suffolk County Republican Party. My opponent has failed to deal with the landfill in Brookhaven Town, one of the most important regional issues facing us, poisoning the community and putting our entire economy at risk. And the Republicans in Suffolk County have refused to put on the ballot the opportunity for all of us to approve a wastewater district management district that is necessary for our future as an island. We can't let that happen. I look forward to speaking with all of you and with Julie going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have a series of questions. They should not be surprising to anybody, but climate change presents really a great threat to Suffolk County. This weekend, we know already that more than 4.5 inches of rain fell in Islip and 4 inches fell in Miller Place. Newsday reported that motorists on Sunrise Highway near Hertfordshire Park had floodwaters filling the lanes in both directions, and portions of the highway had to be closed due to flooding. So all of this comes after, as I mentioned in my remarks, the hottest temperatures in recorded history, measured in 4 consecutive days. So if you're elected county executive, what actions would you prioritize to build up Suffolk County's coastal resilience and address the clear and present danger of climate change?
Obviously, the critical issue of our time. There is no place in probably all of the United States, if not the world, that's more susceptible to climate change than we are here in Suffolk County. Here we are at the end of a peninsula stuck out into the ocean. Suffolk County needs to be a leader when it comes to climate change, and I've been part of that in the past, but I look forward to being a leader going forward. So Suffolk County put together a climate action plan, and I helped with that. And we did it in 2015. It's now 2023, and before the next county executive comes in, it'll be 2024. So we need to update that plan. The technology has changed. Obviously, our world has changed. Our climate has changed. So I'm going to prioritize putting together the next Suffolk County Climate Action Plan and making sure we're eligible to be a climate-smart community. That's the first thing. The second thing we need to do is protect our natural defenses. I chaired for Suffolk County the Superstorm Sandy Review Task Force. We looked back at what happened with Superstorm Sandy and how we can do better going forward. And one of the most important things we need to do is protect our wetlands and restore our wetlands. So making that a critical priority is very important. Another thing, and it relates, Julie, to what we just saw yesterday with the flooding, is as we're going to see more and more of these storms, we need to make sure that our water runoff is not impacting our environment and causing real degradation of our waters. When I was chair of the Planning Commission, I worked along with other leaders to put together what we call the green methodologies for stormwater runoff, an acknowledgement that we're getting more storms, but we need to make sure that that sediment in our bays and on our roads is not washing into our bays and our waters. And so we put together a conference about that. We put together guidance documents and materials, and we try to get developers to understand that it's important that they use new methods to reduce stormwater runoff. We propose things like permeable pavement where the water would seep through. We propose things like rain gardens and bioswales, things that prevent water from rushing in and wiping all that oil and gook that's in our roads into the bays and into our waters. So we also got the Suffolk County Legislature to make sure that every single project in Suffolk County now has exactly that. We need to make sure that our local developers do the same, particularly may need to require that in areas around our bayfronts.
Great.
Thanks.
So New York has some of the most ambitious climate laws in the state, in the country, with a mandate for 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2040. Yet here on Long Island, nearly 90% of the power comes from fossil fuels. So as county executive, can you pledge your support for offshore wind? And what do you plan to do to advance renewable energy projects and foster the growth of offshore wind industry here in Suffolk County?
Yeah. So I actually got the whole ball rolling on this. I served briefly on the LIPA board about 12 years ago. And one of the things that I pushed for and got through LIPA was the largest renewables RFP in Long Island history. It was about 400 megawatts. And that got the ball rolling in terms of these the projects, including now ultimately ending up with the wind projects that we see. Critically important, huge opportunity for us to reduce our carbon footprint. I also was a leader in making sure that we cut down on red tape, because that's what often stymies our renewable energy industry. So for instance, when I was chair of the Planning Commission, the solar contractors came to me when solar started to be a thing, really grow about 10 years ago. They said, we're getting killed because every town and every village has a different process and a different rules for putting together, for permitting solar panels. And I said, well, let's get everyone together. So we literally brought all 10 towns together and most of the villages. We have 32 villages in Suffolk County. 10 towns, almost 32 villages came together, and they all agreed on the same form and the same process. And we said we totally cut the red tape when it came to putting solar panels on the roof. And you saw a huge explosion in solar panel installations as a result of that. In fact, we won for Suffolk County the National Association of Counties Achievement Award that year for that effort. And we were written up in Solar Magazine, and I got asked to speak at a conference in Chicago about how we cut red tape for renewable energy. I said I may be the only person ever who's gone from Long Island somewhere else to teach them how we cut red tape. But it was an honor to do it, and it was for a great cause. We also then put together the East End Wind Code. So for the East End towns, we looked at the map and we saw that the wind was strongest on the East End for people who are going to put wind turbines perhaps on their larger pieces of property. We put together a code for that. And we also drafted the first geothermal code perhaps in the country. In fact, I got a call from Silicon Valley, a company that was starting up in the geothermal industry. They said, you guys wrote the first geothermal code. Would you come talk to us about it? And I did. And then when I was out in Silicon Valley, which I do for work occasionally, they actually invited me to see their new technology. And I think geothermal is a huge opportunity for us going forward in terms of being able to harness additional, the temperature differences in the earth to allow it to have renewable energy. So we need to push forward with financing on wind, supporting the offshore wind, but then financing for solar and geothermal and local wind where it makes sense.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit. Nitrogen pollution, perhaps we've all heard of that, plagues our bays, our harbors, our rivers, our lakes, our estuaries. And we know we need to update our sewage and septic systems to fix this problem, and we'll need to leverage state and federal dollars to do so. In fact, there's a hearing in the county legislature on July 25th to determine if the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act will be on the November ballot. With money from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Bond Act and other major forms of funding available, do you support putting the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act on the November ballot? And if not, how will you make sure that Suffolk County has the funds it needs to fix our nitrogen pollution by continuing to fund both sewer expansion and septic replacements?
So, Julie, I 100% support putting that on the ballot. Yeah. This is perhaps the single step we can take as a community to preserve our future, protect our economy, and protect our health here in Suffolk County. I've been involved in the leadership on this issue since I started at the Planning Commission. We held the very first, we called it Sewer Summit 2, to talk about how we could finance sewers. I headed up with Wayne Horsley, the county's Blue Ribbon Commission on wastewater financing, and used my background as a business person and from finance to talk about different ways we can talk about putting together financing for wastewater. Then, more recently, over the last couple of years, I worked with the county leadership, Steve Calone and others. And in fact, Steve and I actually started this together. So I did the original town hall with Steve, with County Executive Calone, to kick off the water quality effort in I think it was either the end of 2020, the end of 2014, and that we've been working on it ever since. Maybe some of you were on that call. We had 10,000 people on that teletown hall to launch that effort. But now it's culminating after all this years of work, and I was honored to work with the county executive and his staff on putting together. I headed up the legislation working group that drafted the legislation for Albany that they took and tweaked and have now passed. And the key thing about that was they are now letting us vote. But the county legislature needs to put that on the ballot. And I will tell you, this is a massive failure. There's no reason why this shouldn't be on the ballot. It is critical that we provide a funding stream. This would provide us an opportunity to have we control the funding, locally controlled funding, locally controlled. We're going down from 27 sewer districts down to one. Think about the efficiency that creates. Think about the opportunity to fund our innovative alternative septic systems, which are really a key part of the future with our sewer systems. So this doesn't happen unless we pass this November, because frankly, we're running out of money, and we will run out of money this spring and into the summer. So this needs to get passed, and the county legislature is stopping it. And I call on the Suffolk County Republican Party to let the voters decide whether they want to have this single sewer district and move this forward.
We hope to see it on the ballot then. Across Long Island, we've seen widespread contamination from emerging contaminants like PFAS, which people shouldn't even know what that stands for, and 1,4-dioxane, which really only Long Island knows what that is, also known as forever chemicals. These toxins are a threat to our drinking water and the health of residents. Some water districts have installed treatment technologies to remove these contaminants. However, we still have a long way to go to remove the existing contamination and prevent future contamination. So what is your plan to address emerging contaminants in our drinking water?
Yeah. So because of industrial uses over the years, years ago people didn't know this stuff was really bad for you or could perhaps last forever. We now know this, and we don't allow this stuff anymore. But it's in our soils and it's in our water, particularly in some areas. You all are familiar with the different plumes that have been determined, but it's actually kind of all over. The PFAS, for instance, the Brookhaven landfill has been found to have PFAS. So it is all over the place, and it needs to be remediated. What we need to do, quite frankly, is have a funding source. And we have a unique opportunity because the federal government has put up a infrastructure bill that is $4 trillion. And the New York State passed, under the leadership of Assemblyman Engelbright, who I know is here, and others. A green infrastructure bill, which is several billion dollars. So here's the deal: we only get that money if we apply for it. We only get that money if we compete for it. We only get that money if we have a source of revenue that we can then match against it. And without having a district that we would like to put on the ballot in November, we don't have that. And so that's critically important. We need to go get that funding so we can provide the locations that don't have the ability to remediate. This is an expensive undertaking, but it is an undertaking that's critically important for our many communities around Long Island.
So we talked about waste a little bit in your opening. We know that Long Island is on the brink of a solid waste crisis. Certainly when I was at DEC, there was in fact a crisis. The Brookhaven landfill, as you mentioned, is going to be closing in the next few years, and we don't really have a plan for what are we going to do with our waste or the trash that creates it. Yeah. So measures to increase recycling and reduce waste are critical to creating a more sustainable Suffolk County in the long term, but we also need a short-term plan. So with that, if you're elected, what would you do about garbage in the short term, and what is your strategy to reduce waste in the long term?
Let's be clear. This is a fundamental failing of government. The town of Brookhaven has known that landfill has needed to close for a decade, and they haven't done anything about it. They have let the community get poisoned. They have let this leachate go into the groundwater. They've been cited several times by EPA and DEC and others. And yet, they haven't come up with a plan for fixing this problem. And as county executive, I'm going to get the county involved in providing a solution, not only to make sure that the landfill gets closed, but also make sure we have a waste process that works for us going forward. So it starts with a couple of things. We obviously need to move as best we can towards zero waste. That is an aspirational goal. We will never actually get there, but unless we aim towards it, we will never get close. What we need to do is focus on reducing the number of things that go into our garbage. Important piece of that is something called the extended producer responsibility. That requires those who are making the packaging to reduce the size of that packaging. We've all been there, whether it's a holiday morning, birthday morning, whatever, and have all this stuff and all this. There's so much packaging, and all of it goes where? It goes into our waste cycle, right? We need to put the onus on producers of those packaging to reduce it. It's not necessary. We can do better. Second thing we need to do is work on reducing on composting. There's about 25% of our waste stream is compostable, and yet we do very, very little. I'll tell you, in our family, my youngest daughter, Meg, who's here today and is probably not going to be happy that I just mentioned her name, did a science project.
Parents are supposed to do?
That's right. Did a science project a couple years ago, and about composting. And so we got a composter. And this was not an easy process. My wife had to Google it and figure out what to do and which is the best one and how do we go about it, et cetera. Well, she did all those things. And we now have been composting for the last probably 2 or 3 years. And we've seen a reduction in the amount of our garbage, quite a bit. We also, by the way, have a lot of nice soil for our garden in our backyard. But we need to make it easier for people to do composting. We need to create a campaign across our whole region that says this is where we need to move and make it easier. Not that you have to Google 50 things and try to read articles. Let's have the county lead the region and get the message out that we can reduce our waste stream by 25% if we do move towards more composting. Another thing we need to do is obviously have a more regional approach to recycling. Recycling is a huge opportunity. Some places do it well, some places don't do it well, and it's all run at the town level, and that's a problem. We need to have a more regional approach to this going forward.
Great. So one of the things that has been very great that Suffolk County's been doing is purchasing land to preserve it for open space for environmental purposes and significant ecological resources like wetlands and drinking water supplies and river corridors and upland habitats such as the pine barrens. So what is your plan to preserve and protect open spaces in Suffolk County, and how do we sort of get to the best of the rest, some, or save what's left according to others?
It's both, right? And here's the deal. We've done a really good job in Suffolk County over the decades, and we thank the people who are in leadership many, many decades ago who started doing the land preservation, and that's been critically important. There are a bunch of very sensitive places that are left, and there's still always a fight. I led the fight against a development out on the east end that was looking to develop in a sensitive wetland. We fought back against them. I was the chair of the Planning Commission at the time. We blocked that development, and that is now a preserved land, open space that wouldn't be otherwise, and I'm very proud about that. We also, when I was chair of the Planning Commission, working with our talented planning department staff, put together a master list of the priority projects in Suffolk County. We beforehand had 3 or 4 different lists, and there was never any criteria. So it was more who knew who got on the lists than what was actually the good, right thing for the environment. So we created, and our staff was terrific at this, created a scoring system that identified which parcels are actually beneficial from an environmental perspective, which ones actually would make a big difference. And we scored those higher than the other ones. And so we have put together one single list. We also put it online. So there's no guessing about what the properties are that they're important, right? None of this old Crookhaven stuff where it's like, who do you know gets your property bought, right? It matters that you have people who are serious about the future leading this stuff. One other important thing I'll mention. We have an opportunity over the next few years in Suffolk County that we haven't had in a while. So right now, Suffolk County spends about $20 million a year in open space preservation. But that's going to go up to $40 million, and then go up from there starting in 2028. Why is that? Because the bonds that we used to buy land back 15, 20 years ago are now being paid off. So like your mortgage, when your mortgage is paid off, you have the same amount of income, all of a sudden you have money to go spend on something else. Well, the something else is more land acquisition. And so we have a great opportunity starting in 2028 to go get that land. But what I want to do is use sort of financing techniques to actually front run that and try to use some of that money sooner, because as we all know, land values go up. But if we can do forward contracts and things like that, we can actually work to prioritize the land we want to buy, knowing that the money is coming in a couple of years, and front run some of that and be able to get more parcels sooner. And when the cost is cheaper than it'll be in 2028 and 2029.
So you raised in your answer a question that's always out there, the little dilemma of like, how do you balance open space preservation with ensuring that we have economic growth to ensure that there's sustainable development in the county?
Yep, it's a great question. So it's funny, I wrote an op-ed the last time there was an open seat county executive race, which was 12 years ago, I wrote an op-ed for Newsday that said, it was entitled "Protect and Grow." And I said at the time, I was the chair of the Planning Commission, I said, whether Steve Calone wins or Angie Carpenter wins, we need to make sure that we do both, and we don't see them as oppositional to each other. We need to protect what makes us special. Because what makes us special, whether it's our beaches, our water, et cetera, drives our economy. And we need a thriving environment to make sure that A, people want to live here, and B, people can live here, because we've seen what's happened to our economy, and tourism is a huge piece of our economy. When our beaches get closed, when the waters get polluted, our environment is our economy in many ways. These are not mutually exclusive. The other thing And so I think, nothing in that regard has changed in 12 years. That same ethos needs to be how we think about things. We need to protect and we need to grow. We do need to create more opportunity here. We do need to create more affordability here. That does mean we need to have more housing that people can afford to live in. That does mean making sure that we're providing good paying jobs. And my background in the private sector, I have a whole slew of ideas, which I don't think my 30 more seconds or so is going to let me get into, but a whole slew of ideas about how we can grow our economy, and particularly taking advantage of the technology that we have here. Here in this place, we have such amazing science happening. I'm the vice chair of an organization called Accelerate Long Island. It's made up of the presidents of each of the research institutions, so Stony Brook, Cold Spring Harbor, Brookhaven National Lab, Northwell, President of Hofstra, myself, and 2 or 3 others. And we're looking at how do we take the technology that's happening here and take that into the world and create good paying jobs here. I started something called the Long Island Emerging Technologies Fund because we weren't starting enough companies, job creating companies, out of the research at our laboratories. We were able to launch 10 companies coming out of the research here on Long Island. And we have some great things. Esther Takeuchi, whose office is just across this campus, is doing amazing stuff in batteries. We talk about renewables. This is the future. We need to have the battery technology along with the renewable energy to make sure we have a thriving ability for our energy system. We have the keys right here on this very campus.
So in the last question on open space I'm going to ask, there's an island, perhaps some people in this room have heard of, Plum Island, that there's 127 organizations that are trying to preserve and pursuing a national monument status for Plum Island. So what role can the county play in the permanent protection and long-term management of Plum Island?
Yep. So a couple of things. We did one of the things we could do. So in the Planning Commission, we approved rezoning the island, and that was an important step, and this was probably 6-7 years ago. That was an important step because the original proposal from Donald Trump and I think some others was that there be a golf course and condos. By rezoning it, and that was done by the South Hole Town Board, proposed rezoning it to not allow that sort of development. And we approved that at the county level through the Planning Commission. That was important because once you take out the economic incentive for development, that took a lot of pressure off of all these people wanting to put golf courses there or whatever. That was the first step in the solution. The second step of the solution was getting the federal government to designate it as a federal monument and hope maybe even a national park someday. But Suffolk County obviously should lead the effort to advocate for that. We also should make sure that whatever it becomes is a passive opportunity. It needs to make sure that we have good access to it for passive hiking and those kinds of things. It's a real treasure. We need to make sure that it is cleaned up. Obviously, as many of you know, it was a animal research laboratory the federal government ran, and it's been closed for a number of years, but it needs to be carefully remediated, et cetera. But it is an incredible opportunity for coastal birds and all sorts of marine life living there, and a great opportunity for the people of Suffolk County to have access to that as a real gem for passive recreation. And so we need to make sure we have that access and keep that access going forward.
So environmental justice is something that is not always talked about, and I think it's something that's really come around, and we need to look at how those issues need to be addressed in Suffolk County. So how would you ensure that marginalized communities are not disproportionately burdened by environmental hazards and have equitable access to clean air, clean water, transportation options, and green spaces? So
as a prosecutor, we deal with, our focus is on equal justice. And we know that when we're talking about environmental justice, the reason we're mentioning that at all is because it's actually environmental injustice that's been the root cause of that. And that's because communities, marginalized communities, particularly communities of color, have been the ones that are called on to site places like the Brookhaven landfill. And that community, Bellport, North Bellport, and the surrounding communities have been poisoned by that landfill over the years. And again, the town of Brookhaven and my opponent have done nothing about it for 10 years. That needs to close. It needs to be cleaned up, and we need to make investments in those communities because they deserve investments, because they've been underinvested in and they've been stepped on for years. Right? But the other thing that's important about this is that we affirmatively take action to make sure that not just the area around the landfill, but all of our communities, the marginalized communities that have these situations of different kinds, brownfields, et cetera. In Suffolk County, Suffolk County created a land bank about 7, 8, 9 years ago. I was chair of the Planning Commission at the time, though I honestly did not have much to do with it. This was the Planning Department staff and the director, Sarah Lansdale, that really led the charge on it. They put together a land bank that is buying properties in brownfields and remediating them. Most of those brownfields are usually in communities of color. We need to make sure they have the funding they need and the ability to remediate those locations. But we also need to make sure that it is a priority of ours every time going forward. We can fix the sins of the past, but what's incumbent upon us is also to make sure we don't commit sins going forward. And that means being affirmatively thinking about and aware of environmental justice issues, that we call it out, that we have it as a thesis of ours, that it's going to be a value of ours, that we're going to make sure we protect going forward. And it means investing in communities that have been underinvested in and stepped on in the past.
So related to that, what strategies will you employ to engage and empower underrepresented communities in decision-making processes regarding environmental policies and projects so that that doesn't happen?
Yep. So access is power. Being at the table is power, right? So people need to be at the table. And that means making sure that we have communities at the table. So when we had the Planning Commission, we made sure that we had people, when we set up projects, we made sure we were pulling on communities that weren't always heard from. I know the Land Bank does that as well. When we drafted the legislation for the wastewater district that is potentially up for approval this November, it called upon being intentional on making sure that communities that were not always represented got appointments or got heard as part of that process. Critically important that we ingrain that not just in our heads but in our laws. And there are many commissions and boards that the county has and empowers, and we need to make sure that people from communities that haven't always been part of that are part of that. And that in part, quite frankly, involves being present. I've met with folks, particularly in the landfill, the communities around the landfill. Their frustration, of course, is the fact that they have been treated so terribly, but also that they haven't been heard. And it is critically important that we reach out to communities that historically haven't been heard, where these brownfield sites are, where the environmental injustices have occurred, to make sure they're included going forward. And honestly, it isn't just environmental issues, it's economic issues as well. And so I really do applaud, for instance, County Executive's Ballone's emphasis. He started the Wine Dance Rising Project. That was a community that has not been invested in, has been overlooked for decades. Thanks to him, and now Supervisor Rich Schaefer in Babylon is taking the reins from him, they have made a real investment in that community. We need to also similarly invest in an economic perspective in those communities. And that is what we can do to help uplift those communities. It means education, and it means economic opportunities as well as environmental fairness.
So transportation is responsible for the second largest source of greenhouse gas pollution in our state, and cleaning up our transportation footprint is critical to meeting the state's emissions reduction goals. And Suffolk County is a car culture if ever there was one. As county executive, how will you prioritize and invest in sustainable transportation options?
Yeah, great question. So we have a couple of opportunities in front of us that I'm excited about. Steve Calone has committed that the county is going to move its buses to be all electric by 2030. That's a good thing. But I'd actually like to go a little further, because I actually think we have too many big buses running around Suffolk County. We need to have, I think, smaller buses that are more on-demand type buses. I think that'll help, A, reduce the carbon footprint. Yeah. B, it also makes it easier to electrify. Smaller vehicles are easier to electrify. The reason that the bigger vehicles are harder to electrify, it does take time, is because the horsepower needed to drive electric is more challenging, right? It's why the smallest cars, EVs, when they started with small cars, right? And now eventually we have all the way up. I think there's a Hummer that's electrified. But it took time, right? And so for buses, similarly, we can get electric buses on the road much faster. but also, small buses is much faster. And the reason small makes sense is because we can then have it more on demand. And I think one of the problems we have in Suffolk County with people using the bus system is that it runs on a very fixed schedule, and quite frankly, runs up and down roads where it often isn't needed. And that's simply because they can't run it that frequently because they're big buses and they're expensive. Well, if we had smaller buses, more efficient, we can make it more on demand. That'll get more people on those buses, which is what we want, reducing traffic, reducing carbon emissions from the cars, and also make it more accessible and usable by the public. They did a pilot project in the South Fork with this, and it's very successful. I look forward to bringing that across the county. The other thing we need to do is create an electric vehicle charging network. So Long Island and Suffolk County in particular is one of probably the best places where we can have electric vehicles. People actually don't drive that far to commute. We may drive a long time, we just don't drive that far. But that sad reality is actually a benefit to us when it comes to electric vehicles, because we can have the biggest fear that people have about electric vehicles is, am I going to run out of juice, right? Because people don't travel as far, if we can create that electric vehicle network, working with gas stations, working with the private sector, we can make a huge dent in that. The other thing I'll mention is I think we need to electrify the Long Island Railroad to go out further. Right now, the electrification of the Long Island Railroad ends at Huntington on the North Shore, Ronkonkoma in the middle, and Babylon in the South Shore. We can extend that using fuel cells. There's some innovative ideas to extend that electrification that'll allow for cleaner ride, more sustainable infrastructure, and more people taking the train, which would be a good thing too.
That is a good
I know
thing.
I'm out of time. I got more stuff to say, but I'm out of time.
So increasing temperatures due to climate change can negatively impact the productivity of the agriculture industry by disrupting food availability, reducing access to food, and affecting food quality. And we know, of course, that agriculture is a big piece of the economy here in Suffolk County. So how will you protect farmland in the county, from the threats of climate change?
Yeah. So a couple things. Suffolk County actually is the second largest agricultural county in New York State. Huge driver of our economy. One of the critical things we have done as a county but need to continue to do is to preserve farmland. So we have about 20,000 acres approximately of farmland that's been saved here in Suffolk County, preserved, can never be redeveloped, saved for farming. We probably need to get up to closer to 30,000 to create a sustainable economy. And the reason for that is because, if you're a tractor salesperson or a feed store or whatever, you need to know that there's enough business around. Right now, we have over 30,000 acres in production. It's just we're losing some every year with development, right? So we need to be meeting that with more preservation on the county side. The other thing we need to do is make sure that we have farmers. So when I chaired the Planning Commission, we heard a study that said that the average age of farmers in Suffolk County was increasing. It was up to in the high 50s. We said, well, we need more young farmers, right? We need the next generation. So we pulled together a meeting. We actually did it in East Hampton Town Hall, I think. We brought a bunch of young farmers, new farmers, who had just started farming, said, why aren't there more people like you? How do we help people like you and your friends get started in farming? Because it's great to have farmland, but we need to have farmers, right? And they said, they said, we have friends in the city who have a laptop. They can buy a laptop for a couple $100 and they can create a coding company like that. For us, we got to have a tractor. We got to have feed. We got to have fertilizer. The costs of starting as a farmer are immense compared to other small businesses. So we put together a program called Farmers for the Future. And we got $1 million from New York State to help those young farmers, new and starting out farmers, have the resources they need to be able to start. And what they said to us is that allowed them, more and more people, to be able to start as farmers. And that was critically important to making sure we have the next generation of farmers. We need to continue that effort. When it comes to climate change, farming is, and I know I'm out of time, farming is obviously at risk. We need to make sure we are helping our farmers with the best technology. The last thing I'll say is this. Cornell Cooperative Extension is funded partially by the county, is a tremendous scientific organization that's helping our farmers make do with less. And it's especially important when it comes to nitrogen. So nitrogen is what mostly fouls our bays, but nitrogen is needed for growing fertilizer, for growing plants, et cetera. So they've developed what's called time-release nitrogen, which allows there to be less nitrogen put down because it's actually releases over a longer period of time. That's the kind of cutting-edge stuff we need to be investing in, and Suffolk County has a unique resource in Cornell Cooperative Extension to have great scientists working on those kinds of things. It's got to be a collaborative effort with the environmental community and the Cornell Cooperative Extension working together.
All right, so Vanessa Locke will be glad to hear that. But you have a nice segue here, because our last question of the main questions is, about youth and climate change. Because there seems to be a growing level of disenchantment with politics and the ability of our elected officials to solve the climate crisis, particularly among young people who are going to be most impacted. How do you think about this as you connect with young voters on the campaign trail? And what will you as county executive do to demonstrate that the government is not only taking the threat seriously, but is doing something about it and not just planning?
Yeah, great idea. Great point. So the reason I decided to run was because there had never been anyone like me as county executive. There's never been anyone coming out of the prosecution community. There's never been anyone coming out of the business community. And quite frankly, as I said earlier, I have the breadth of experience between the law enforcement side and the not-for-profit side and the business side, as well as the county leadership side when it comes to the environment. And so I think people are tired of people who've been in politics forever. I think people are looking for people with new answers and new experiences they can bring to be problem solvers. And one of the things I thought was most exciting about Suffolk County is I've worked in Suffolk County as a volunteer over these last 10 plus years in various capacities, is that it isn't so much about left or right, it's about how do you problem solve and how do you move us forward. And so that's what appealed to me about this position and this job. And when I talked to young people about it, I said, look, we need people who are going to take other experiences from life and bring them to the problems we have as a community. And that's what I've decided to do. And I also said to hold us accountable. Let's set a meeting 6 months in, a year in, whatever it is. Because the problem with politics, I think, and for people, particularly people who've been in politics forever, is it's just get to the next election, get to the next election. Well, the next election for county executives is 4 years from now. That's far too long to work on climate stuff. We should set deadlines and hold ourselves accountable, for instance, for having a climate action plan, which we did in 2015. That's a great thing. It pushed Suffolk County forward. We did things like, we're switching out all the light bulbs and all that stuff. It's good stuff. But we haven't done another climate action plan since. Let's do it. Let's do an inventory of all the buildings. The largest landowner in Suffolk County is Suffolk County. We have these buildings all over the place. We've never done an audit of those to see, are they environmentally sustainable? Should we even keep all of them, right? Hold us accountable. Understand that there's people who are interested in getting involved and good people who are not just sort of in politics forever, but are there to actually solve things and want to be held accountable.
Great. Okay. I have a few easy. I have a few mostly easy questions.
Okay.
What's your favorite beach or park in Suffolk County?
Oh, okay. Great question.
You can do one of each if you'd like.
Okay, cool. Obviously, I love Smith Point for the ocean, but during the pandemic, we lived not that far from here, and we spent a lot of time in McAllister State Park. We love the dunes there, and we love sort of the quiet of it. That's in Port Jeff Harbor, for those of you who don't know, and it's got the big dunes. And in fact, my son's baseball team, they sometimes run up those dunes to get some good workout in. I won't do that. But it's a great location and it's a really special place.
Great. Have you ever driven an electric vehicle?
Yes. Well, I had a hybrid. I don't currently, to be honest. I had a hybrid.
How about all electric? Have you driven one?
No. Well,
not asking if you've owned one.
So when I went out to Google to talk with them about the geothermal stuff, they actually took me a ride in one of their self-driving cars, and that was pretty cool. It's coming. It's coming. It's cool. But that was all electric. So did I drive it? No. Did I ride in it? Yes.
Okay. By the way, the AIs like to keep you further away from a car than anyone in Long Island would ever do. That's my experience with my electric car. On your property,
yes.
Septic or sewer?
We have a septic, and we've applied for the county plan, the county innovative alternative septic systems. But we're sort of stopped in the process because we got hung up when all that stuff was going on, the tax stuff and everything stopped. So we need to restart that. We need to re-up that application.
Okay, this one is less easy, but maybe it isn't. If you're elected Suffolk County Executive, would you continue to strengthen the IA septic system replacement program? Yes or no?
Yeah, 100%. Hugely important. The IA septic system. Oh, can I say anything else? Yes, because it's really important. The reason it's really important is because sewers don't work everywhere. Not that they don't work, but they aren't needed or appropriate everywhere. And by the way, the IA systems have twice the bang for the buck when it comes to reducing nitrogen. And so when we talk about how do we reduce nitrogen overall, the IA systems need to be a critical, significant piece of our investment going forward.
What is your favorite way to connect with the environment?
I think going for a walk. We're blessed to live. I think all of us are blessed to live in this place, and it's a special place. And I think going for a walk in one of our county parks or our state parks is a great way to take a step back. I love the fact, by the way, that for those of you who know Hauppauge, you know that, of course, a lot of major roadways right there, but you step into Blydenburg Park for about 15, 20 steps, and all of a sudden, the bustle of the world goes away, and you're enveloped. In fact, my wife and I went, I think it was our anniversary once, we went for a hike around Blydenburg, the lake there, and it was a lot longer than we thought it was going to be. Those of you who know that lake, it has all these fingers to it, and it went all the way around, and I think it took us a long time.
6 miles.
6 miles. It was 6 miles.
There we go. That
So we'll walk around the lake.
long
It's a nice anniversary. Well, it took us 6. We're a little tired afterwards.
Okay. Do you vote early or do you vote on election day?
I like to vote on election day. Certainly appreciate those who like to vote early. I think it's important that we give people the choice and people have access. But I kind of like going on election day. And I liked, particularly when my kids were younger, my 3 kids are here, I liked
And you only
them
embarrassed
coming
one
with
of
us.
them.
What's that?
And you only embarrassed one of them.
I only embarrassed one of them, yes. The other 2 got off, luckily.
You already answered this question, but I'll ask it anyways. Do you compost?
We do compost.
Yes. How do you prefer to travel around Suffolk County?
How do I prefer to travel?
Yeah.
Well, frankly, the way we travel is by car. One of my staff members has a Prius, so we usually drive that. Another person who sometimes drives me does not have an electric vehicle, but we're more often than not in the EV. But that's generally how I get around Suffolk County.
Do you usually use a plastic water bottle, or do you usually carry a reusable water bottle around with you on the campaign trail?
So I'm really glad you gave this to me because I often forget. I don't do a very good job of drinking generally, so I don't usually bring water with me at all. But this will be handy, though. My kids have reminded me that we have all these water bottles for their school lunches that I need to be sure I take them when I go out. So.
Good. I will say he did show up with one.
I did show up with that's true. We have them. Yes.
And are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future health of the planet?
I'm optimistic because of people like those who are here today who care and who are stepping up. I mean, I think we're seeing, people investing time, resources into our planet that, quite frankly, is essential. But it's encouraging to see. I think the technology that we're seeing is tremendous. When I was on the LIPA board, there was actually a debate about whether we should even do renewables not because it wasn't the right thing to do, but because of the cost. And yet, over the next couple of years, the costs are reduced so dramatically that it made sense to not just do the amount of wind that we had suggested, but to do even more. And that is where we're going. Technology needs to drive us forward. Old technology, got us where we are from a climate perspective. We need new technology to dig us out. But I'm encouraged because there's places like Stony Brook, and people are dedicating their careers to making sure that we have cutting-edge technology, whether it's renewables, whether it's sequestration, whether it's battery technology, et cetera. I'm optimistic, but we need leadership that's going to make sure that we keep it as a priority and that's forward-looking and believes that the best is yet to come, and we can get there.
All right. Now that was relatedly not on a very lightning round question, but
Okay,
I'll give you 50-50 on lightning round.
Okay. That was not very good.
On the lightning piece
I
of it.
failed the lightning part of it. Yes, sorry.
With that, you have 2 minutes to give a closing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the league and citizens and everyone who helped put today on. It's critically important, obviously, that we make sure the environment is at the top of people's lists when it comes to their priorities they're thinking about when it comes to this election. But let me say this. I'm excited about this election. I'm excited about the future of Suffolk County. I think I'm the right person to lead us forward. But let me not make this about me. Let me ask you to do one thing. Let me ask you to call your Republican county legislators and make sure that that water quality bill gets on the ballot for you to choose in November. There's nothing more important. Yes, you should vote in November, but there's nothing more important that you could do now. There's one more chance they have next week to put it on the ballot, right? I mean, this should be simple. This is a clear-cut way for us to invest in the future. Let us vote. This is a bipartisan effort. Let us vote. This is critical for our children's future and our grandchildren's future. Let us vote. Please reach out. Let's make sure this happens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Appreciate it. Good luck.
I think so.
Yeah, of course. Where's my photographer? Oh, there we go.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good luck. Okay. Thank you, Dave, and we appreciate you being here tonight. We look forward to hearing more from you on the campaign trail. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next candidate, Brookhaven Town Supervisor and former Suffolk County Legislator, Ed Romaine. Ed, thank you so much for being here. To start, you have 2 minutes to give an opening. This is our timekeeper right there.
Timekeeper?
Timekeeper.
Right,
He's going to
right
show
there. Oh,
30
thank you.
seconds and time's up. Very subtle.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Citizens Campaign for the Environment and New York League of Conservation Voters for sponsoring this. Secondly, I've been in public life for a while. I'll just go back a couple years. For the 4 times I ran for county legislature and the 5 times I've run for town supervisor, I want to thank New York League of Conservation Voters for endorsing me. I want to thank the Sierra Club for endorsing me each time I've run. I want to thank the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum for endorsing me each time I've run. And the reason I want to thank them is their endorsement has meant a lot for me because of the work I've done for the environment. I am particularly concerned now. We face a drastic situation. 10 days ago, we had the 4 warmest days that this earth has ever seen. Climate change is a huge concern. And I think Newsday in their editorial said it was my #1 concern. I see sea rise. I see other things that are happening, habitat being threatened, biodiversity being threatened by climate change, and I am going to do all I can as county executive to address that issue. I think we have an issue of solid waste. We have an issue with how we generate our power. I'm a huge fan of solar and wind and have led the way in terms of wind in my town. And I see huge challenges for solid waste management. It is a crisis that's affecting all 10 towns. There is no legal requirement for towns or villages to be involved in garbage at all. And yet they are, and yet they're not getting the help from the state. I saw the state waste management plan. I am hopeful that there will be a change in that and some of the things that we've been advocating in the town, which I'll address as we get into the questions. Thank you.
Great. All right, so starting at the top with the biggest issue, we know that climate change is really presenting the greatest threat to Suffolk County. As you alluded to, we had 4.5 inches of rain here yesterday in Islip and 4 inches in Miller Place, and Newsday had, covered the fact that the Sunrise Highway was flooded out.
I couldn't walk my dogs.
You couldn't walk your dogs. There you go. I couldn't run outside. So all of this comes, as you noted, as we had the hottest temperatures in recorded history for those 4 consecutive days. So if you're elected county executive, what actions would you prioritize to build up Suffolk County's coastal resilience and address the clear and present danger of climate change?
Well, first of all, we're the only town in Suffolk County with 3 coastlines: the Sound, the Great South Bay or Moriches Bay, and the ocean. We are strongly affected by climate change. When I was running for supervisor in a special election in 2012, Superstorm Sandy hit. I was still a legislator for Eastern Brookhaven and the North Fork, Shelter Island. But a good friend of mine was my councilman, Dan Panico. I took a tour of Mastic Beach. Anyone that knows Mastic Beach, there's a east-west road called Neighborhood Road that is the main road. Everything south of that was up to your knees and flooded. Trees were down all over, poles were down all over, houses were flooded. But the one thing I remember most distinctly, and I think I've said this before, is the odor, the smell. Most of their cesspools are either close to the ground or above ground. You smelled their cesspools, and it was floating all over. And the second thing is their oil tanks were all above ground, but not strapped down at the time, and they all tipped over. And with smell between that and the oil that permeated, and I thought, oh my God, how is this village ever going to get back? Well, they got back, and the first thing they did is disincorporate and come back to the town of Brookhaven. And we were intimately involved, whether they were a village or whether they were part of town. It's instructive to the damage. We developed, as supervisor, a policy of strategic retreat. I've worked with the Nature Conservancy, the National Fish and Wildlife, and a whole host of other people to buy 150 acres of wetlands that had been, some of them had been built on, and restore them and make sure I'm going to take the same actions as supervisor. I'm going to solve problems.
So we know that New York has some of the most ambitious climate change laws in the country, including a goal of 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2040. Yet right here in Suffolk County, we rely on about 90% of the power comes from fossil fuels. So as county executive, can you pledge your support for offshore wind? And what would you do to advance renewable energy projects and foster the growth of the offshore wind industry in Suffolk County?
There are problems in Wainscott. They're opposing it. Litigation. There are problems in Long Beach. They're opposing offshore wind. We welcome it in Brookhaven. We are going to have 964 megawatts of power from Sunrise Wind 1, which is coming ashore at Smith Point and running through the town of Brookhaven to the substation at Holtzville. We welcome a second wind power at Shoreham, which will come ashore at Shoreham and run down William Floyd Parkway, hopefully to the substation in Colmac. We welcome wind because we understand the Sunrise Wind project can power 600,000 homes. We only have, I think, 180,000 separate households in Brookhaven town. Think of it. We can substitute green, alternative, non-polluting power for that we're currently getting from LIPA and those who run LIPA or those who ran LIPA.
Shifting gears a little bit, nitrogen pollution plagues our bays, our harbors, our waters, our rivers, our lands, our estuaries. We know that we need to update both our sewage and our septic systems to fix this problem, and we'll need to leverage state and federal dollars to do so. As you know, there's a hearing of the county legislature on July 25th to determine if the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act will be on the ballot in November. With the money from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Bond Act, and other major revenue streams becoming available, do you support putting the Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Act on the ballot? And if not, how will you make sure that Suffolk County has the funds it needs to fix our nitrogen pollution problem by continuing to fund both sewer expansion and septic replacements?
First of all, let me say in 2015, Brookhaven was the first town to require anyone that built within 500 feet of any body of water to put in an IA system. It's an absolute requirement in the town of Brookhaven. Secondly, anyone that replaces their cesspools or septic system has to put in an IA system, town code. As far as this referendum, I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is far from perfect, but it's better than what we have. Why do I say that? I'm a supervisor. I lead. I'm an executive. When I have a town board, I work with all of my town board members, regardless of party. And when I came in, town board was Democrat, and I flipped it Republican 4-3. But you won't tell the difference because we work together and we work on a consensus basis. I don't believe the county legislators were involved in drafting the legislation. And they were given the impression that this was going to be for sewers. And then they woke up to the fact, well, 75% is for IA systems, 10% for administration, whatever left over may be for sewers. I understand their frustration, but again, I am not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is this referendum better than what we have? Absolutely. I support it. Do I think it should be better? Do I think it can be improved on? Absolutely. I'm also concerned about to getting rid of the sewer stabilization reserve fund, because that fund is there to make sure rates in sewer districts do not rise, and that's part of this plan. And there's a number of other things in this plan that are troubling, but you take an overall broad view. So yes, I would support it strongly.
Great.
And let me go further. Later on, maybe.
You can finish your thought. It's okay.
My thought is, I hope it goes through. But if it doesn't, you have an ironclad commitment from me that another plan will be forthcoming as soon as possible. And that plan will include consultation with all 18 county legislators and will not be drafted in secret and all of a sudden it's there. So I will push for this plan because the future of Suffolk County depends on sewers and IA systems. We have to get nitrogen out of the water, and I will strongly push for that.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that this plan goes through.
Okay. So on the other side of the ledger, we have seen all across Long Island widespread contamination from emerging contaminants like from PFAS and 1,4-dioxane or forever chemicals. These toxins are a threat to our drinking water and the health of residents. Some water districts have installed treatment technologies to remove these contaminants, but we have a long way to go to make sure we remove the existing contamination and prevent future contamination. So what is your plan to address emerging contaminants in our drinking water?
How many people get their water from Suffolk County Water Authority? So then if you read the notices, you know the millions, the tens of millions that the Suffolk County Water Authority is spending to get these forever chemicals out of our water. We need to do more. The state needs to ban the use of these chemicals. That's going to be a burden economically. But weigh that against our health. I think our health is more important. These chemicals need to come out because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're in your shampoo. They're in the sprays that you put on your frying pan. They're everywhere. We need to get rid of these chemicals, and the only one that can do it effectively with the authority is the state of New York. So these forever chemicals, if we don't get rid of them, they will poison us, slowly but surely. They're in our groundwater. They're all over the place. And look, for those who get water from the Water Authority, look at the millions that they're spending to try to treat this. How much better would it have been if they never entered our water to begin with? So I am 100%, and will lobby Albany to get rid of these chemicals.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about waste management in your opening. We're on the brink of a solid waste crisis, and there have been moments in time when I worked at DEC when it seemed like there was a crisis right before Memorial Day one year. That was really fun. And as you know, the landfill is going to close within the next few years, and we don't really have a plan for what to do with our waste or the trash that it creates. So measures to increase recycling and reduce waste are critical to creating a more sustainable Suffolk County in the long term, but we also need a short-term plan. So if elected, what will you do about garbage in the short term, and what is your long-term strategy to reduce waste in the long term?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
No problem.
Hit the highlights.
Let me start by saying I was a county legislator in 2012. Supervisor Lesko left in the middle of his term. The town board had been elected under Brian Foley. I think he's here tonight. Is he? Brian, are you here? I thought he was. He became supervisor, Democratic majority. Landfill. Supervisor Lesko becomes supervisor. He had a Democratic majority. He put sewage sludge on top of the landfill. I heard that. And then the last thing he did is petition to raise the landfill. The landfill sits at 270 feet. He wanted to take it to 325. That's when I said, absolutely not. And when I campaigned, I said, we are not increasing the size of that landfill. And what I did by saying that is I put that landfill on a path to closure. That landfill is going to close. What are we going to do? Well, one of the things that we're going to do is take a serious look at what Albany is doing. Their new plan that just came out is a wake-up call, fortunately for them, because we need to look at zero waste. We need to look at composting. We need to look at buds of beneficial use determinations, so things like ash and concrete, and also, besides ash, you can also use other products as aggregate. We need to start using products so we work to a circular economy. We cannot continue where we're going. Each human being here produces about 5 pounds of waste a day. And that's not the commercial, or that's not construction or demolition debris. So you're talking about 14 million tons a day just from residential waste. This is a problem that must be addressed. The new state plan goes a long way to do that. And I endorse it and support it.
Great. All right, one of the things that Suffolk County really deserves a lot of applause for is that they've purchased 50,000 acres of land to preserve for important environmental resources and significant ecological areas, including wetlands, drinking water supplies, river corridors, and upland habitats like the Pine Barrens. What is your plan to help us preserve what they call the best of the rest, or the save what's left?
I am committed to preserving the best of the rest, absolutely. When I became supervisor, this town board was mired under Supervisor Lesker for 2 years trying to come up with a plan to conserve Commons River. And their plan was to transfer the development rights. I worked with my board. I got a unanimous vote. We preserved, not transferred, development rights, all of Commons River. When I was a county legislator for the 1st District, which is Shelter Island, Southold, Riverhead, and Eastern Brookhaven, I preserved more land in my district than the other 17 county legislators together. And I'm a huge supporter of saving Plum Island, which is sitting out there as the last jewel for Suffolk County. We are going to save what is left. Something should be developed. I believe in transit-oriented development, absolutely. But a lot of what's left in Suffolk has to be saved. Particularly the trees would help us fight climate change, as you know. So, yes, I'm a huge believer in open space preservation. And Dick Amper, who's sitting there, can tell you that I lobbied with him to put another 1,100 acres, 350 in Mastic and Mauritius, and 800 of the old National Grid property in the core of the Pine Barrens, which would prevent it from being developed. So yes, I strongly support preservation and will continue to do so. And Dick knows that, and that's why I'm very fortunate that Long Island Environmental Voters Forum have supported my efforts in that regard. Thank you.
So you've kind of answered one of my questions, because I was talking about preserving Plum Island is one of my questions.
Huge.
So,
Part of my old
so
district.
thank you for that. But you highlighted this a little bit, but what can you do, or what would you do to balance that need for development, because they still need to have growth, with open space preservation to make sure that there's a sustainable
We should talk less about development and more about redevelopment. There are so many areas that we've developed commercially that can lend itself. Look at the strip shopping centers that are abandoned. Look at the stores that are abandoned. Look at the office space we don't need. Redevelopment is the way to go as opposed to new development. Preservation. We only have one island. We need to save what is left. You come to my old district office in Riverhead when I represented the 1st District, and there's a big banner which is known to most people on the North Fork. Save what is left. Someone asked me about planning. I said, you want to be a planner? Do this. Imagine yourself 1,000 feet tall, and you're standing astride Suffolk. Look west, then look east. Look west, and then look east. And guess what? You just learned all you needed to know about planning. Think about that.
I somehow have a picture of Robert Moses overlooking a model.
Absolutely.
All right, so shifting gears a little bit, How will you address environmental justice issues in Suffolk County to ensure that marginalized communities are not disproportionately burdened by environmental hazards and have equitable access to clean air, clean water, transportation, and green spaces?
That's not environmental justice, that's justice for everyone. One of the reasons the landfill is closing in Brookhaven town. The landfill was built by the state of New York, not the town of Brookhaven, in 1974, and turned over to the state. The state turned it over to the town to run it in 1976. And as I said, I was upset by the efforts by the previous board of another party to raise that landfill by 50 feet. I was upset at the fact that they dumped New York City sewage on top of that landfill. And that's when I made the decision. We're not doing anything with that landfill. And eventually it would fill up, and it has, and it will be closed. And we have a $30 million reserve fund so that we can monitor that landfill for the next 30 years. Environmental justice, we all deserve to have clean air and water. And by the way, Suffolk has some of the dirtiest air in the United States. Part of that is our doing, but a lot of that is stuff that comes from the industrial Midwest, because air travels from west to east. So it is an issue that we should all be concerned about. It doesn't matter where you live, but what does matter is that we all have clean air and water to breathe, and I'm going to make sure that that is the case. And I'm going to work closely with our 10 towns, because they don't, some of these towns are very small, and I've represented them. They don't have the leadership that is necessary, the guidance that is necessary, the support. The County of Suffolk has not been deeply involved in waste management. That will change the day I become supervisor. I know my other 9 supervisors, and I am going to work very closely with them and the state with their new solid waste plan to make sure it's implemented and we have a circular economy and we concentrate more on recycling, which requires markets. If we don't have people to buy recycled goods, recycling fails.
So what strategies would you employ to engage and empower some of these underrepresented communities in decision-making processes so that we don't end up with environmental and justice issues?
Well, I think those issues, the one issue is the landfill. We have multiple old landfills that are closed. Anyone been to the ecology site? That's a landfill that was closed in the 1970s. That is now our ecology center. We had landfills in Manorville. We have landfills in Patchogue. We have old landfills that have closed that you won't even know because you passed them by and they've been closed for decades. This landfill is going to close. It's going to be capped. I already have an agreement with NYSERDA to do about 170 acres of solar on that landfill. That landfill will be put to useful with no one polluting, no industry, no traffic, no noise. But we have to ensure that all communities have clean air and clean water. The landfill is monitored by the state. They check us every single day. And they have not found serious issues enough that would warrant it closing. I just think it's not a healthy thing, and it should close. And that's why when I ran in 2012, after what I've watched the past administration do, I made a decision, no more. And once I said no more, that landfill was put on a course to closure. And it will close. It will close to, and by the way, since 1989, the landfill has only taken 2 items: ash and construction debris. So we will stop taking construction debris in 2024, and if there's any space left, that space, and that will be up to the new town board because I won't be there, but that space will be used to put ash in it. It will be capped. 75% of the landfill is currently capped. It will be capped as each of the cells that are left are filled up.
Okay. So transportation is responsible for the 2nd largest source of greenhouse gas pollution in our state, and cleaning our transportation footprint is crucial to meeting the state's emissions reduction goals. Now, Suffolk County, we know, is a car culture, if ever we had one. So as county executive, how will you prioritize and invest in sustainable transportation options?
Well, First thing, I want to have a press conference that our current county executive did. A brilliant idea for rapid buses, and then it just disappeared. You have to stay with what you have to fight for the things that you believe in. I have been fighting for electrification of the rail. I'm supervisor of the largest town geographically in the state, second largest with a population of 500,000. We have 3 lines that cross my town: the Montauk line, the Main line, the Port Jeff line. None of them are electrified, none. Steve Engelbright, as an assemblyman, will tell you how hard I have fought with MTA to electrify the Port Jeff line and to electrify the Main line, at least from Ronkonkoma to East Yaphank, where Brookhaven National Lab is. I will continue that fight. We are not getting our fair share from the MTA, and that's unfortunate. I mean, I had to fight for them to get funding for a bridge that was built in 1909 on Sheep Pasture Road that was falling apart. So you have to be a fighter. You have to be willing to take on that fight. I'm a great believer that we have 2 elements. We may not have a lot of public transportation. I'm a believer in public transportation. But everyone has to use a car. I remember when the president of Long Island Railroad came out to Riverhead, talk about improvements that she was making. I said, well, let me ask you something. What train did you take to get here? Whoops. Whoops. We can tie our buses to our trains, and we don't do that now. And we can get a better synergy for public transportation. When I represented the East End, I asked for a scoot train to go from Riverhead to Greenport, which is the end of the line. And they could run on an hourly basis, and we could use the small school buses in the neighborhoods in something as less densely populated as North Fork to provide public transportation. And if you could do it there, you can certainly do it in the rest of Suffolk County. We have one town, Huntington, that has its own, its own bus hot, which is Huntington. But yes, I believe in public transportation and will work hard to ensure it's coming.
For the record, I took the train here.
Thank you. Easy.
Increasing temperatures due to climate change can negatively affect the productivity of agricultural industry by disrupting food availability, restricting food access, and affecting food quality. So how will you protect the farmland in the county, which is such an important part of the economy, from the threats of climate change?
Well, first you have to fight climate change. I represented most of the farming area in Suffolk County when I was the legislator for the 1st District. I'm very close to the Farm Bureau. I know their struggle. You have no idea what it is like to be a farmer. You have no idea when you put your crop in the spring, in April or May, and then you get heavy rains, or you get a drought, and you just watch your livelihood go down the tubes. Farmers give us the food we need and the sustainability that we need. We have to have a program that benefits our farmers. We have to help them, and we have to help them address the ravages that climate change is waging. That's an economic war that climate change is waging against our farmers. We have to be involved in that, and that means that government has to step up to the plate because it's not their fault that their crops get ruined.
So my last question in this part is, there seems to be growing levels of disenchantment with politics and the ability of our elected officials to solve the climate crisis, particularly among young people who will be most affected. So how do you think about this as you connect with young voters on the campaign trail, and what will you as county executive do to demonstrate that the government is not only taking the threat seriously, but doing something about it and not just planning?
This campaign and the campaign to address climate change is about the future. The young people that sit here, they may not have the breadth of experience to see what happens over a long period of time, but they are far more sensitive to what's happening to our environment. I would work closely with the young, because when you plant seeds and you nourish them, things grow. We need to build a sustainable future, despite the threat of climate change. We need to move away from fossil fuels and polluting industries. We need to move away from polluting chemicals. It is so self-evident that even young people, and I have 3 grandchildren, that even young people understand that. I watch my 5-year-old granddaughter plant these little seeds. She understands. If these seeds take and grow, what lesson is that for her? This earth sustains us. We live in a small planet. We think it's bigger, but it's not. And this planet is our home. If we don't take care of our home, we'll have no place to live. So when I see my granddaughter, and she's the youngest of the 3, plant the seed, I pray to God that it grows, because it will teach her a lesson, that this earth was made for us to sustain. If we treat it properly, if we respect Mother Earth. So I'm going to talk about respecting Mother Earth, because we are all children of Mother Earth, whether we're 90 or 9. So that's what I'm going to do.
Great. So I have a few shorter form questions.
Oh, sure.
We call it a lightning round, but we stretch. You don't have to just say yes or no to most of these. Yeah, right. Well, what is your favorite beach or park in Suffolk County?
Cupsock Beach at the end of Dune Road, which is, by the way, still in Brookhaven town.
Have you ever driven an electric vehicle?
Yes, many times. I have a staff member that has an electric vehicle on my campaign, and he drives an electric vehicle. So I've been in one many times.
On your property, sewer or septic?
On property?
Where you live, your house.
Oh,
Are you on
I have a
septic or are you on
I have
sewer?
a septic.
There
We
we
don't
go.
have sewers. I pray to God we have sewers. So many people would love to have sewers. So many people. And that's the problem. There's such a demand because our problems are so overwhelming. Sewers, IA systems. I'd love to do sewers. I know areas, Kings Park and Smithtown and St. James, Patchogue, Sayville, West Hampton, Southampton. The new mayor of Southampton, Bill Manger, who I know, came up to me, "Can you help me get sewers, Ed?" It is a problem. I know IA systems are scattered and therefore the impact isn't as great. I would prefer sewers, but I hope I don't have to make the Hobbesian choice between the two. I'm going to do whatever advances the cause of protecting our ground and surface waters. So that's when you ask me about the referendum. I am never going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is it good? Yeah. Could we do more with sewers? Possibly. So I'm going to support that. I'm going to support anything that improves our water quality that's reasonable.
Well, that's a good lead into the next question, because if you're elected Suffolk County Executive, would you continue to strengthen the IA replacement program?
Absolutely.
There you go. Perfect. Here's a lighter question. What is your favorite way to connect with the environment?
My favorite way to connect to the environment? I have a lot of favorite ways, but I don't have too many peaceful days. So when I do, I have a rocking chair on my deck. I have a wonderful backyard with trees and bushes and all over, just to sit there and soak it in. Nature has its own way of relaxing us, of putting our lives in perspective with the wonders of nature. I have flowers. My wife's a great gardener, thank God. And I can just sit there and take 10 minutes and just look around and absorb the beauty that nature has offered us.
Great. Do you vote on election day or do you vote early?
I vote on election day for the most part, because usually I have a habit of going there, thanking the poll workers. My wife usually comes with me, and afterwards we go out to the diner for breakfast.
That's a very...
So it's a good breakfast anyway. I'll get something out of the voting.
I like it. That's a very Long Island answer. Do you compost?
Yes, I do. My wife is a gardener, and we compost, particularly in the back of my yard. And what I'd love to do, and we need the money for, and the town has handed out some of these already, we have those compost tumblers, and they're about $350 a piece. Boy, if I had $350,000, I'd buy 1,000 of them and give them out. And no, you know why? Because we need to have that circular economy. We cannot continue producing the waste that we produce and expect that we're going to live in a better environment. So yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Not only do I want to compost, I want a lot of people to compost. I want to find money for something that is going to have a long-term effect. Those tumblers will last 15 years, 20 years, and you can get people doing this. It would be so wonderful. And hopefully some of them, not everyone lives in a house, and I understand that people live in condos and apartments, but those who live in houses, hopefully they start gardens if they can. That's what composting is for. Part of the circular economy.
Absolutely. How do you prefer to travel around Suffolk County?
How do I prefer to travel? Well, my staff member will take me in the electric car. When I was a legislator for the East End, we had no Sunday bus service in Suffolk at all. And I represented the North Fork and Eastern Brookhaven. And my colleague, Jay Schneiderman, who is currently the supervisor of Southampton, and a friend, I taught him 7th grade social studies when I was a teacher. We got together and we said, let's push for bus service. And back then, New York wasn't giving licenses to non-citizens. It's the S92 route. It starts all the way out in Greenport and runs around the island, down the South Fork to East Hampton. It is the most heavily, or was, the most heavily traveled bus route in Suffolk County. And we were able to convince our colleagues, because the one thing you don't do is you don't fight with your colleagues, because they vote on things for you. And when they need things, you try to help them out, so they help you out. We needed bus service. We got bus service. And I remember Jay and I riding that bus from Riverhead. And hopefully, thank God I took a little of it in high school, you can habla español. Because most of the people on that bus habla español, because they weren't allowing driving licenses back then. Now they can get them in other states like South Carolina and other states like that. But I will tell you, it made me understand that bus travel was so difficult in Suffolk County that it was the transportation of the desperate. We've got to do better with public transportation. And we have to have bus routes that work. We get 1/2 the state aid for our buses that Nassau does. And Nassau's a county 1/3 the size geographically of Suffolk. We need to lobby more. I'm not shy. And I'm not concerned about what party the governor belongs to or the state legislature. But I am going to fight, and I am going to raise my voice for public transportation, because I saw those people. And I thought the hours they had to spend on the bus, because many of them lived in Riverhead or in Greenport, and they were going around to the South Fork where their jobs were. And I looked in their eyes. Got to be an easy way to do this. And we all owe an obligation to one another to help one another. If we all stand together, we can all lift each other up and make sure no one falls down. That's what public transportation is all about. And it should be convenient, and it should be available. We should get our fair share of state aid. So, yes, I'm going to fight for that. I'm going to fight for electrification. I'm going to fight for better transportation. We have diesel in my town, the dirtiest fuel you could imagine. That's a 19th century technology. We don't even have electric, which is a 20th century technology. Forget maglev, which is a 21st century technology. We don't see that. Why not? Why not? We're a very wealthy county comparatively to other parts of the United States who have better transportation. You go to foreign countries like Germany or Japan, they have high-speed trains. You got to be kidding me. MTA equals cost overrun. We all know that. They're always looking to figure out more ways to take money. It's almost like LIPA and all the trustees that seem to raise our rates all the time. I couldn't believe it.
All right. I have one more that's... We're doing so well on the lightning part of this. All right, one that's quick, and then one that you can opine again, and then we'll give you 2 minutes to close. All right, do you usually use a plastic water bottle, or do you usually carry a reusable water bottle with you on the campaign trail?
New York League of Conservation Voters, a wonderful gift tonight. We should all be using things like this because we have to be in a circular economy where we reuse things. We should not be the throwaway society. We were terrible in the 60s and the 70s. We were a throwaway society. And then we all remember The Graduate. I've got one word for you, if you remember that part of the movie. Plastics, remember that? Well, guess what? What we thought was so great turned out not to be so great. The old basics, the reusables, that's what's great. Let's go back to a circular economy. Let's go back to a simpler way of life. We've got too complicated, and we've lost our way. We need a clearer vision, and we need to protect what's left of this island. Save what is left. That was the charge, particularly of my constituents from the North Fork, and I never forgot that.
So
let's make sure we all have reusables.
Yes, thank you. And this is our plastic-free July.
To your health.
All right, so the last question, and then I'll give you 2 minutes to sum up. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future health of the planet?
I'm both. I'm both, and that sounds like a cop-out. I'm pessimistic because I see the challenges that we face and how great they are, particularly with climate change. I'm optimistic because we have so many great people. We're a nation of great people. We're a nation of optimists. We're a nation that believes in our future. America has always been a nature, if there was a tense that you would assign to this country, it would be the future tense. We don't live in the past. We're a nation wedded to the future. So from that point of view, I am very optimistic about America. I know we see a lot of things. People beat their heads. I watch some of the people in Washington fight. Parties divide. I think how foolish. I'm so happy I'm in local government. I am blessed with a great town board. And as I said, when I went in there, we had 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and I became the deciding vote. But you know what? We never had a deciding vote. Almost all of our votes in the town were unanimous because we worked together. Local government's about common sense, doing things that work. We need a government focused on that. And we need a people to tune out sometimes of the nonsense on TV and at the national level and sometimes at the state level and focus instead on the future of this country. This is a country built in the future. This is a country built for the future. And when we lose our vision, when we lose our way, we will fail as a country. So I'm pessimistic about the scope of the challenges we face. I'm optimistic because I see the people of America. And forget all the nonsense you hear on Fox or MSNBC, all that nonsense. This is a country of optimists. This is a country that's forward-looking. And we should always stay forward-looking and problem-solving. So that's where I'm going.
Okay.
Okay.
Would you like to issue a closing statement?
Thank you, New York League of Conservation Voters, to the Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I think the more we discuss issues, and the more we talk in a campaign. Someone asked me, what is politics about? The source of all politics is ideas. And we forget that sometimes in the anger, people getting upset, saying nasty things about other people. That isn't what politics is about. Politics is about ideas, and ideas drive us forward, and that's what we should concentrate on. And I'll leave you with this thought. I used to teach in Dowling, in Suffolk, and right here in this university. Here I taught administrative law. In Suffolk, I taught all the histories. But there's a saying, when old men plant trees, under whose shade they will never sit. Surely, you know the world is moving in the right direction. We should all think about that. When old men plant trees, under whose shade they will never sit. Sometimes we have to give of ourselves, even if we don't get a benefit from it. It isn't always about us. Sometimes it's about the future generations. And saving this planet is exactly about that. So thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Really appreciate Julie.